Chase Senior's in the house, and the story of the morning is that Niners quarterback coach Brian Griese has been offered or has denied the Jets to interview him for their head coaching opportunity. He wasn't offered the job, but he has no plans to leave his current role, at least not for the Jets. And earlier this month, the Jets had requested permission to interview Griese for their head coaching vacancy. But according to the New York Post, the Griese declined the opportunity to interview for the Jets. And something tells me that maybe Robert Saleh told some Woody Johnson stories, and they may have filtered back to Brian Griese. That's just a guess. What's your read on it, Chase?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because Brian Griese getting hired by Kyle Shanahan a couple of years ago as the Niners quarterbacks coach after San Francisco moved on from Rich Scangarello was kind of a surprise at the time because Griese was in the broadcast booth for such a long time, but he did play under Mike Shanahan with the Denver Broncos in the late 90s into the early 2000s. Obviously, college football was different when he won a national championship when he was the starting quarterback at Michigan, but went on to have a pretty successful career in the pros. And he was in the NFL as a quarterback from 1998 all the way through 2008, Super Bowl champion, Pro Bowler in 2000, NFL passer rating leader in 2000, completion percentage leader in 2004, that national championship at Michigan in 1997. And then he goes on to be a broadcaster on Monday Night Football on ESPN. And I thought he did really well. And then the Niners had an opening for their quarterbacks coach, and Kyle Shanahan hires Brian Griese. I imagine that his dad, Mike, had a little bit of a say in that. And what Griese's done with no previous coaching experience, I think has been really impressive. And he's put together a good body of work here. And the development of Brock Purdy partially can be credited to what Brian Griese's been able to do as a coach, because his tenure coincides with the growth and the maturation process and the development of Purdy. And Brian Griese works a lot with Purdy, and he's been high on him since he was a rookie. And so it's easy to see why, in my opinion, the New York Jets would want to put a feeler out there for Griese, given the experience and the success that he's had in college for a big program like Michigan, in the NFL, being around Mike Shanahan and John Elway, and now being around Kyle Shanahan. We see the fingerprints of the Shanahan, Sean McVay, Matt LaFleur offense really littered across the NFL. A couple of things that come to mind for why he might have declined the interview. He doesn't think he's ready yet. He hasn't called plays, but also a lot of people around the league know that the New York Jets are a dumpster fire of an organization. So why would you leave a good spot where you can continue to develop as a coach to go somewhere where you might think you're a little bit inexperienced to be a head coach and you're not ready for that job yet, but also you're going to an organization where you just don't see it as a good fit. And professionally, sometimes you try to seek money and you chase money, but I think fit is so underrated sometimes. Like me at Chat Sports, I love it there. I don't want to leave because I feel comfortable. I have say. I can do and talk about whatever I want. Another place could offer me a lot of cash, but if I'm not able to have the role that brings the best out of me as a sports broadcaster, why would I leave and go somewhere else? I think Griese is looking at that scenario pretty similarly in a football standpoint.
But you were just saying, no. No, seriously, you do an amazing job. And you're right. When you're happy at a place, there's something, it's the grass is not always greener.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. There was also talk about him maybe going back to Michigan at some point, and there has been more than a few whispers about Griese leaving. Why do you think that is? I mean, do you think that he's worn down in his role? You think he's done as much as he can do? Do you think he's looking to, be a larger role than the quarterback coach? What's your read on where he is career-wise? Because, it's a major step to go from the broadcast booth to coaching as far as hours and commitment and, quality of life for your family, so on and so forth. He seems to have cleared that hurdle seamlessly and is ready for the commitment. It's just a matter of, does he want to stay out here, as a quarterback coach for Shanahan with Purdy? Seems like he's done a nice job. It's hard to evaluate, though. How do you evaluate where Griese is and the job that he's done here?
Well, it's kind of funny because he's done the reverse path, right? Usually when you're a player, you become a coach and then you're a broadcaster, right?
Right.
You as a player, a broadcaster, then a coach. And when you're a former NFL player or you're involved in the NFL as a coach and you end up getting a broadcasting gig, it's a cushy job, right? Because you don't have to do the grind of being an NFL coach, which is early mornings, long nights, not a lot of sleep. You're away from your family. You're constantly grinding tape. There are practices all the time. Given the business model of the NFL and the schedule of it, it's pretty much become a 10-month-a-year type of sport. The only down month really is in late June into July. And so you're getting like 6 to 8 weeks really throughout the calendar year in which you're not doing anything. So it's actually interesting how Griese has gone from a broadcasting gig where you can do prep all week from your house. And then if you're calling a game, you fly out to the game, you come back. The only days that you're really away are Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Outside of that, you're not having to travel. You're not having to grind tape and go through the rigors of being an NFL coach. And so it's actually interesting that he went from broadcasting to being a coach. And, I had reported back a couple of months ago from Michigan sources that Michigan and Sharon Moore were very interested in bringing in Brian Griese as their OC. He went there. He won a national championship there. Michigan just landed the #1 overall recruit and quarterback in the 2025 class. And so would have been a cool opportunity to go there and call plays. But maybe he just isn't ready to call plays. Maybe he's just an NFL guy and he doesn't have to want to deal with NIL, young kids and teenagers. The college game is a little bit more dramatic and it's inconsistent as far as the players that you're coaching. You never know when kids are going to hit the transfer portal. At the NFL level, there's a little bit less fluidity, I guess you could say. And maybe he's just comfortable with that. Maybe he's just trying to continue to stack up the resume. And he's saying, you know what? I'll continue to be the quarterback's coach. I like working with Kyle Shanahan and Brock Purdy. And then when the time comes where I feel as though I'm ready to call plays or be a head coach, then I can do that. But that time is not right now. And I don't think he's really a viable candidate to get the Jets head coaching job. So why would he waste his time?
Right. Fly across the country, take all that time. And he doesn't see, I'll say this, Griese seems like a no frills guy.
Yeah.
He doesn't seem like a guy who is going to be impressed by meeting the Jets people and I can build up my Rolodex and this and that. Now he doesn't seem like that kind of guy. Let's talk a little bit about the offensive coordinator position. They offered it to Clay Kubiak, and then Kyle realized he hadn't satisfied the Rooney Rule, and then is backtracked and is now interviewing guys. They interviewed a guy named Paulie from Iowa State.
Iowa State, yeah.
How does Kyle Shanahan make that mistake? I mean, he's been in the league for a long, long time. Is it possible that he thought the Rooney Rule was only open to the head coach and not the coordinators?
I take exception with this NFL rule because in corporate America, in any type of line of business, regardless of the industry, we see internal promotions all the time. And if you have somebody in-house on your staff or on your payroll who's an employee and they're doing a really good job and you want to promote them, that's a reward to them for working hard, succeeding, doing a good job, and you view them as a viable person to elevate within your business. And so I think Kyle Shanahan was looking at what Kubiak's been able to do. His brother, by the way, looks as though he's going to be the new offensive coordinator potentially of the Seattle Seahawks. He was the OC for the Saints last year, did a good job the first couple of weeks before the Saints suffered all those injuries. And he looked at Kubiak and said, look, he's been our pass game coordinator. He's done a good job, knows our system, knows our organization. He is that viable candidate to elevate up to offensive coordinator. He's pretty much been our OC over the last couple of years. So why not just make it official, help him out for his career, be another Kyle Shanahan disciple? I've been saying all off season, Larry, I think Kyle Shanahan could benefit from having a new set of eyes on the offensive side of the football. Frankly, I would have loved for it to be an external person, not somebody who's been within this organization, because I think a fresh set of eyes could benefit Shanahan with the offense being a little bit less stale, a little bit less predictable. But it's so funny because Shanahan really likes his own guys, and Kubiak, of course, is the son of Gary Kubiak, who was working with Mike Shanahan while with the Denver Broncos. And so it follows that tree that's a couple of decades long. But clearly Shanahan didn't know the rule. Otherwise, he wouldn't have said that for the end of the season press conference. And he kind of comes away with it with egg on his face coming after some people thought he didn't know the overtime rules back against the Kansas City Chiefs in Vegas in February.
Yeah. Well, this one, though, and it's funny, I was sitting next to Lombardi when Lombardi asked him the question, and I wonder if he just kind of spoke out of school because it just seems odd. Then you've got the embarrassment of having to go back. Do you think there'll be a league penalty for the fact that, let's just say they go and they do their due diligence, they interview the right people, but then they go back and hire Clay Kubiak. Are they going to be subject to a fine or draft pick? A draft pick being taken from them for that mistake, you think?
I could see that maybe like a late round pick or a little bit of a financial penalty. But again, I just think it's a dumb rule. Like, I get it that if you're having a search for, what the Niners are undergoing right now, special teams coordinator, defensive coordinator, where you let a coach go, and you have to interview external candidates and, of course, satisfy the Rooney Rule, which also is an unfortunate rule because these minority candidates are just getting interviews to fulfill the Rooney Rule. And so it's kind of good in theory to give these minorities a shot and to have more diversity in the league. But at the same time, it's kind of a slap in the face. At least I would feel that way if I'm being brought in for a Rooney Rule type of interview, because I know you're doing that just to satisfy the rule. It's not like the Niners fired an offensive coordinator. They didn't even have a person as OC. All they were trying to do was have an internal promotion. So again, kind of a dumb rule in my opinion. Wouldn't surprise me though if they do fine the Niners or they dock them a draft pick or something.
It's always awkward because it's sad that the Rooney Rule had to be in place at all. But, you had to incent. I mean, there's a lot of people that feel that the incentivizing of hiring minority candidates is not, in the spirit of fairness, and that the 49ers, who have gotten multiple draft choices because of their hiring practices, there were actually teams that were pushing back on the 49ers saying, oh, well, they're circumventing the rules and doing all this and they're getting all these draft picks.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait a second, do you want minority candidates to be interviewed because they are doing that and then they're hiring these minority candidates and then those candidates are getting hired away by other teams. Essentially, it's working exactly the way people want it to work. And people are going to complain about that because the Niners have gotten some draft picks along the way. It's like, what are we talking about? The whole thing's kind of sad, but that's just kind of probably a statement about, how far we haven't come as far as minority hiring practices. Defensive coordinator wise, are you as surprised as I am that Robert Saleh seems to be as coveted as he is? I thought, failed in New York, had the run in, it looked like with Rodgers at the end, that he would just drift back into the defensive coordinator role. But Jacksonville's interviewed him. He sounds like he's a viable candidate there. I'm hearing that he's a very viable candidate in Dallas. He interviewed as well for the Raiders job, yesterday, I believe. Is Robert Saleh going to get a head coaching job and the Niners going to get denied in their efforts to bring him back?
Pretty interesting because interviewed with the Jags on Tuesday, interviewed with the Raiders on Thursday, and now he's kind of the first known candidate for the Dallas Cowboys after they decided to not renew the contract of head coach Mike McCarthy. And with Robert Saleh, I think you got to look at it a couple of different ways, right? He was brought to the Jets after a really successful run with the 49ers, looked at as a really bright defensive mind because he was a terrific defensive coordinator with San Francisco and was a part of the rebuild of that entire organization. And I think him being under Kyle Shanahan, pretty attractive to the Jets at the time. So he was the linebackers coach with Jacksonville under Gus Bradley from 2014 to 2016. And so the Jags know him. He's said to have a lot of fans within that building, and he's a real candidate to take over for that job. But if I'm Robert Saleh, I just went from the hapless, dysfunctional New York Jets, and I was fired by an impulsive owner in Woody Johnson who didn't pull the trigger on a Jerry Jeudy trade, according to reports, because his Madden rating wasn't high enough. And Robert Saleh was brought in as a defensive guy. The defense with the Jets was excellent during Saleh's tenure. They were consistently a top 5, top 10 overall unit. And so with his specialty, that side of the ball really thrived. But with the Jets, they never got quarterback right. But he did such a great job with that defense maximizing players, finding star players, and coaching up those star players. I thought during his Niners tenure, Larry, some of the most impressive work that he did was in 2020 when San Francisco had those rash of injuries, yet they were still one of the top performing defenses in the NFL. And so the defense wasn't the problem with the Jets. It was the offense, and it was not being able to find a quarterback. But I think the Jags look at him as a guy who they have familiarity with. They know what he can do as a coach, really good defensive mind. But if I'm Saleh, I don't know if I want to go from one bad owner in Woody Johnson to another in Shad Khan, and I don't get to enter that tenure with the general manager alongside me. I have to inherit and work alongside Trent Baalke. What if he gets fired? A new GM comes in, and then he doesn't like me, and then I get canned once again as a head coach. And if I'm Jacksonville, I kind of want to go offensive mind here. Joe Brady, Liam Cohen, to try to get Trevor Lawrence back on track. Yeah. And then with the Las Vegas Raiders, for Saleh, it's an opportunity to work in lockstep with Tom Brady. He's really running that head coaching and general manager search. But if I'm the Raiders and I'm in the market for a quarterback, I want to bring in an offensive guy, especially if I draft a player like Shadur Sanders, because I want to get that development right, knowing that if the offensive coordinator does a good job with the defensive head coach, he's going to leave, and then you have instability at that offensive coordinator role. For Dallas, I think Saleh's hiring or interview there, I should say, is more to satisfy the Rooney Rule to a certain degree. But I do think that people around the league look at him as a Kyle Shanahan protege, a really good defensive mind whose specialty he did have performing very well with Jacksonville. And it also is a pretty light head coaching pool for teams who are looking for a head coach. And so, yeah, his services are hot right now. The Niners have a lot of competition. And they have to be a little bit careful here, because if they just keep waiting and waiting and waiting, and Saleh doesn't give them a word as to what he wants to do, are they going to miss out on some of the other top defensive coordinator candidates?
To that end, and I quickly pivoted to this because I saw you were going there. This is out right now on Coach Yak's Twitter, at Coach_Yak. Matt Barrows on the 49er defensive coordinator search. It's Robert Saleh or bust, really, because they haven't done much work with anybody else to this point. I've heard that they already told Saleh, we will make you the highest paid defensive coordinator in all the land if you sign with us. So now it's just a matter of waiting for Saleh. Wow. This is via the Tim Kawakami podcast. That is interesting.
That's huge.
That is huge. That is huge. And what do you know? Like, what's Fangio making? Who is the highest paid defensive coordinator?
Man, I don't think they make coordinator hire or coordinator salaries public. I know that head coaching salaries are kind of public, but I've heard some rumblings that Vic Fangio is making like $8 to $10 million per year to be the Eagles DC. Wow. So I hear you break that down, right? On one end, it's kind of bad organizational practice for the Niners to not do any research on anybody else, because then if Saleh goes somewhere else, are you screwed? You don't know who to hire.
Or is it Brandon Staley automatically by default?
Right. And then on the other end, and what a bad internal promotion that would inspire no confidence or hope in the fan base or the players, I don't think, because he was with this staff last year. Brandon Staley was a Vic Fangio disciple. That is notable, and Fangio really liked him when Staley was alongside him in Chicago. But yeah, on the other note where I was going with that, it's Saleh or bust. You've done no research on other candidates, and that's coming from Matt Barrows right there. So that's a credible source. On the other end, if they're willing to just invest in him and make him the highest paid defensive coordinator in all of the land, I do appreciate that aggressiveness and that willing to spend, because I do think Saleh is one of, if not the best defensive minds out there. So if they're willing to just give him a bag, and if I'm Saleh, how about a little bit of a career reset? Don't screw yourself over going from the Jets to the Jags. How about you come to the Niners? You have this defense balling out. You maximize these players. You get to have a defense that has some really good pieces with Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, Diamador Lenore, Renardo Green, Malik Mustafa. We'll see what happens with Dre Greenlaw, Talanoa Hufanga. You have them playing well once again. And then you wait for a better head coaching opportunity as compared to the dysfunctional Raiders, the awful Jags, and I just don't think he's a real candidate to get that Cowboys job. I think it's Kellen Moore or Dion.
Let me ask you a question about Fangio. 2 years ago, the Niners, I think, considered Fangio, but didn't hire him. Why do you think that was? Is it as simple as a move to Fangio indicates a move to a 3-4? And they wanted to keep Kasarik, and they didn't feel like the two could coexist. I mean, I'm just trying to make sense of it one way or another. Do you have any insight at all into maybe why the Niners did not hire Fangio when they had a shot? I know Jed loves him, and the ownership loves him.
Yeah, of course. And obviously he was a fantastic defensive coordinator under Jim Harbaugh. He's literally one of the best defensive minds in the history of the NFL. And what he's done with the Eagles this year, it's been one of the most impressive coordinator jobs that I've ever seen, given how bad the Eagles defense was last year. I mean, they were 30 to 32nd in pretty much every major defensive category. They couldn't
What did
get
he
after
do?
the quarterback.
What did he do to turn it around?
So, yeah, I'll get to that, right?
Yeah.
So, they couldn't rush the quarterback. They couldn't tackle. They couldn't cover. They couldn't get off the field on third downs. They were awful in the red zone. They were poorly coached. Vic Fangio has turned that completely around. Now, of course, Howie Roseman deserves credit for that. And the development of some of their young players has allowed that to happen. Nolan Smith went from 1 sack in year 1 to 6 sacks in year 2. He had 2 sacks of Jordan Love in the wild card round. You lose Fletcher Cox to retirement, and in year 2, Jalen Carter becomes an all-pro player. Josh Sweat rebounds. You sign Zach Bond for $3 million. He is a first-team all-pro. You draft Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, who are 2 of the top cornerbacks in the entire NFL this year. You bring back C.J. Gardner-Johnson, who there's always drama surrounding him, but he's the heartbeat of that defense. He's played awesome. You have Reed Blankenship as a UDFA, and he's turned into a really good ball-hawking safety. And so they've drafted well. They've developed well. They've had very cost-friendly deals where they've knocked it out of the park. $3 million for Zach Bond, a first-team All-Pro, and they identified him as a player who previously, Larry, had never played off-ball linebacker. He wasn't a coverage guy. He was an edge rusher. And so that's on Howie, but that's on Vic Fangio. And Vic Fangio has been a part of the strides for these young players, the developments of these other players. Nakobe Dean is another one who took a massive leap before suffering that torn patellar tendon. And so that's what good coaches do. Good coaches find a way to put players in a position to succeed. They maximize them, they develop them, and they've kind of had that similar scheme. But Vic Fangio has also adjusted his scheme to his personnel. That's why I'm such a big fan, and that's why I've been pounding the table for months, ever since Saleh got fired by the Jets, to bring him in, because he's going to be able to do a lot of those same things. Now, I think why Shanahan didn't hire Fangio in the first place, to get back to your original question, they love the 4-3. They love the wide 9. They had the personnel to run the 4-3. And if you switch things up a little bit, Nick Bosa is just going to be a full-time stand-up edge rusher. And Vic Fangio does like his edges to drop back in coverage from time to time. I think they really like Chris Kosaric, and how could you not? I think Chris Kosaric is one of the top defensive line coaches in the NFL. What he's done from a player development standpoint has been terrific. And Vic Fangio, old school guy, takes no bullshit. And I think that he would be the head coach of that defense, and he'd want full say. And I don't know if Kyle Shanahan would be a fan of the scheme change, but also kind of the big personality and the old school type of personality that Fangio has and had. And I think it's a mistake in hindsight, because what Fangio's done with Philadelphia, he's literally turned them from arguably the worst defense to the number 1 defense in the NFL in one single season.
I also don't really believe that Kyle was being genuine at the presser when he was saying, yeah, we're willing to switch our scheme. I think that's just his way of saying, hey, I'm open to anything.
Right.
You know, we don't have a guy and we're open to anything. But in reality, I don't think they're open to anything. I think they badly want to retain Chris Kasarik. They badly want to retain their wide nine. As you said, it fits Bosa, who's their most valuable defensive player in a lot of ways. And I just think that Saleh, the blank check for Saleh does make a lot of sense because if you want to retain Saleh, if you want to retain Chris in your front, and Saleh likes Chris and likes that front, it's a marriage. It's a fit, and man, as they found out with Sorensen, and as they'll find out if they don't land Saleh, it's hard to find a fit. By the way, yep. I typed in highest paid defensive coordinators into Google. What it spit out was as of June 2024. So this is going into last year before training camp. I don't know when Vic signed with the Eagles. It says Vic estimated compensation $4.5 million.
Okay.
He's the number one guy. He seems like he's the highest paid coordinator. Mike Zimmer estimated $4 million. Steve Spagnuolo estimated $3.5 million. Todd Bowles estimated $2.4 million. I don't know. I don't know if that's accurate because there's no real source. They're just kind of spitting that information out. I don't know where it's gotten from. This other this other chat mention from Steve Cass is interesting. He says David Lombardi has a plan. Is it doable? Hire Saleh and have Jeff Ulbrich come in as an assistant, so he's there to take over when Saleh leaves. How realistic is that? Well, they work together in New York, and I know that Saleh and Ulbrich would be very popular with the Niners ownership group. So maybe that is a solution. I will say this: my only downside to Robert Saleh is the fact that you've already had a bunch of turnover at DC, and what if he gets another job next year? And then all of a sudden you have another one and done and you got to turn it over. What do you think, Chase, about the idea of Dennis Allen? Just from the standpoint of he runs the 4-3, they play a lot of man. I think the Niners should play more man. I don't think he's going to get a head coaching gig anytime soon. So you might have a 4 or 5 year run where Dennis Allen could be your kind of version of Spags, a really good coordinator who had head coaching experience. It didn't work out, so he's kind of recommitted to the DC role. It's worked for Kansas City. I think the lack of continuity, there was a great article by Jeff Howe in The Athletic about how the lack of continuity of these other teams competing with Kansas City have made Kansas City that much more dominant because they've got continuity with Taub, with Reed, with Mahomes, with Spags, and all these other teams are changing things out aggressively. What do you think?
Yeah, so with Jeff Ulbrich, he got an interview to become the Jets head coach, didn't do a good enough job as an interim to land that head coaching job. The Atlanta Falcons also bringing him in to become their next defensive coordinator potentially. And so he has some offers elsewhere. The idea isn't a bad one. If Ulbrich doesn't become a DC somewhere, why not just come to San Francisco where you played, where you're beloved? You have continuity alongside Robert Saleh. Then the Niners, in turn, have a little bit of continuity, too. They can make Robert Saleh the highest paid defensive coordinator in the NFL. By the way, I was seeing that Fangio is making $4.5 million with the Dolphins, and so I imagine the Eagles gave him more money, especially considering he's from Pennsylvania, too, and he's a little bit older and so experienced. But I'm a fan of that plan if you can make it work. And if Saleh were to leave, which if he has this defense balling out, I think that's a real possibility. Then you slide Jeff Ulbrich in, and that's not the continuity from having the same defensive coordinator, but it's the continuity of having somebody who's worked in lockstep with Robert Saleh over the last several years. And so that's a good one right there. As far as Dennis Allen, I've said this on my show, and I was talking about it earlier this week. I think Dennis Allen is the next best choice to be the Niners defensive coordinator if things fall through with Robert Saleh and he gets a head coaching job somewhere else. And a few reasons for that. People want to knock Dennis Allen for being a failed head coach with the Saints and with the Raiders. He was an elite defensive coordinator under Sean Payton. And when it comes to player evaluation and coach evaluation, I trust Sean Payton. Look at what he's done with the development of Bo Nix. Look at what he did during his tenure in New Orleans. He's a great offensive mind, but look at some of his hirings too. Greg Williams was a good DC for a long time. He has Vance Joseph with the Broncos right now, and the Broncos were one of the top defenses in the NFL without a lot of like marquee premier defensive talent. And so Dennis Allen was a great DC under Sean Payton. He's also very creative with his coverages on the back end. And that's different than a guy like Brian Flores, who you will see a lot of eye candy, aggression, and a lot of creativity with his fronts. He will put 5 or 6 guys as down linemen. He'll put 7 to 8 guys in the box. He'll send the house. He'll tease blitz. Some guys will drop back. They'll run twists and stunts. And so Flores is creative in that way. Dennis Allen is creative in a different way, where he mixes and matches and gets creative with the coverage on the back end. And so he has a long defensive background and has done a great job of developing DBs. Think about this Niners roster right now. They have some really good young DBs.
Renardo.
Exactly. Yep. Like Diamador Lenore played at a Pro Bowl, All-Pro level this year. Renardo Green was excellent as a rookie. You have Malik Mustafa. And a reason that I want to see a good defensive coordinator come in here is the development of players. Get Jair Brown back on track. I watched him at Penn State. I covered him at Penn State. I saw what he did in year 1 under Steve Wilkes, who had a defensive background. And he played very well, replacing Talanoa Hufanga. The guy intercepted Patrick Mahomes on a really nice play in the Super Bowl. He can be in the box. He can roam deep. I think that a good DC can put him in a position to succeed. I think that Jair Brown is a player. And so Dennis Allen could do a good job of maximizing him. As far as the scheme continuity goes, Dennis Allen runs a 4-3. He's that 2-time failed head coach, so he's not going to get another head coaching job. So that would give the Niners continuity at defensive coordinator. Something interesting here, too, if Kyle Shanahan wants to make some adjustments, and if he still wants to run the 4-3 but have different elements of it, since 2017, the Niners are the #1 zone team under Shanahan. During his time with New Orleans, the Saints were the #1 press man rate in the NFL. And then Allen relies on 4 to get home. The 49ers have the 5th lowest blitz rate since 2017. And so you'll see differences in press man. You'll see some creativity and changes adapting with what you do on the back end. But some of the scheme and schematic elements are still the same with Dennis Allen.